Hello and welcome back for this final session for this year's APS annual conference, and thanks for staying with us on what may have turned out to be the hottest day of the year. We are very pleased to welcome back our speakers from this afternoon. We have got James York from Collective Architecture, Sebastian Corby from the Safety Tech Accelerator, Andy Krebs from Sweco, and Patrick Hayes from iStruct. James is an architect and he specialises in sustainable design, and that allows him to provide practical design solutions for clients so that they are able to minimise the environmental impact of the things that they do. It also, in these energy conscious days, helps them reduce their energy consumption and to improve overall building performance. Sebastian is a digital strategist and innovation expert. He has got extensive experience across transport, infrastructure, and the industrial sectors. He advises corporate clients on integrating new solutions into their existing practice, so that they are better able to meet the challenges that they have. So it allows them to optimize what they're doing. Andrew Krebs from Sweco, where he is the chair of the Society of Digital Engineering. Gosh, that sounds very impressive. I'm always very impressed by people who've got any form of technology background, because I'm the kind of person that tries to put a kettle on and blows up all the lights. He's been there since its foundation, and he has been a contributor to CIBSE's digital steering group for over a decade. Patrick Hayes is the technical director at the Institution of Structural Engineers. As I mentioned earlier, I'm particularly grateful that he's been able to find time to be with us today, because I know that they are at the forefront of providing government and industry with advice on the current problems with RAC. He leads there on climate change and computational design and structural safety. He also oversees management of the cross-reporting scheme on structural and fire safety. So, I mean, clearly he's been having a very busy time of it. So thank you very much to our panel today for being able to join us. We've had some great questions in from the floor today, and I think what we will start with is, let's have a look. Ian has asked us about whether or not AI and technology is actually more of a challenge than an opportunity for the industry, and he cites the ageing workforce as perhaps being a little bit of a barrier to it being more of sort of a help than a hindrance, or in this case a hindrance than a help. So let's start with, let's see how will we go. Do you want to fire it in there, James? What do you think? Do you think that we have got a problem with the ageing workforce, and whether or not they wish to adopt new solutions?
Well, I think we've got quite an experienced workforce, and I'd be sad to see people losing jobs to AI. I think we're quite a long way from that. In the meantime, I think AI is going to be a huge benefit to us. Certainly in our sector, what we're looking to use AI for is to streamline some of the visualization processes that we're doing. We're seeing other practices using AI to iteratively test solutions and develop frameworks for optioneering buildings at an early work stage to streamline the workflow. I think where our aging workforce is really going to come into its own is actually making decisions based on the data and the outputs that the AI can contribute. And so AI is going to ultimately be a tool that we can use, as far as I see it, and we just need to learn how to leverage it.
Okay, Sebastian.
Yeah, I think there's no disagreement that AI is a challenge. It's obviously an opportunity, but it's also a massive challenge, especially in terms of hard infrastructure sectors, especially construction, civil engineering. We've probably been talking about AI for, I don't know, 10, maybe 15 years at a push, and a lot of people are still using paper. I don't necessarily think that an aging workforce is the biggest challenge, actually. I think on the one hand, they're the people that are most likely to be pushed out should an AI reach the level of efficacy that it can replace an individual, not only because of their skills, but simply because of like where they are in their careers. They tend to be the people within the workforce with the most entrenched, I guess, cultural views on how things should be done, not to put it in a negative light, but they're also the most experienced people. But having said that, I don't necessarily think they are. I think it's a bit of a it's a bit of a soundbite to suggest that an aging workforce is a real blocker for AI. I think the bigger blockers are things like quantifying the benefits of AI, the fact that because it's so emerging, it involves a different sort of investment strategy to simply buying something off the shelf. It involves iterative development, a lot of failure, and I think a lot of companies in the construction industry especially are not actually kitted out to be able to realize those benefits. So yeah, it is a big challenge, but I think an aging workforce is not our biggest concern.
Andrew.
Thank you. I think there's been a couple of interesting points raised already, and I want to sort of refer back to my own experience many moons ago of going around a previous employer teaching everyone how to use a piece of emerging software. And whilst I can certainly echo some of Seb's general points about different parts of the workforce maybe responding to change in different ways, I think it's fair to say that people who have more experience, when they choose to engage with something, are much more powerful advocates of a new technology once they're on board with it than, say, for example, younger people might be, because they almost expect it to be. No, yeah, well, of course, young people like AI because it's new. But going back to the original question about whether there's a challenge or an opportunity, I think it depends entirely on how we choose to use it. I have, as I'm sure we all have, been involved in discussions about how we can use it in our own fields. And it comes into two camps for me. There's people who want a black box just to make it all work so they don't need to worry. And you've got people who are worried because it's a black box that does all the work, and they want to figure out how to wield this thing and make it better. The motto I use is, if a job needs done 100 times, a human should define the first one and a robot can do the next 99. And I think that's where the aging workforce question comes into it. These are the best people by far, the most experienced, to be defining how AI should be used for a particular workflow, and then checking to make sure that AI has not made a horrible pig's ear of it. On the other side, just because it's AI doesn't mean it's going to be right. I've managed to convince various large language models to speak some cataclysmic nonsense without much difficulty. And this is meant to be the pinnacle of what we've got. So I do think, yeah, we can make it a challenge for ourselves if we believe it verbatim. And if we don't use the experience people like James spoke about to bring that experience and really interrogate this new tech.
Okay. Patrick.
Well, as someone in their mid-50s, I feel this might be a bit aimed at me, this question. So let's look at the opportunities to begin with. What AI can do is, based on very good input data, generate designs. But my concern with that is twofold. One is that the input data has to be good in the first place. And two, when you look at innovation theory, quite often that is combining very, very different things. And it's also based on sort of taking technology transfer. So AI has its place in generating designs, but it is not the only channel that can be used. Now, in terms of the challenges, with it, and particularly with the ageing workforce. I do think we have to flip this on its head a bit. And one of the things which we're involved in at the moment is knowledge management. When you look at the processes, unfortunately, sometimes when technology comes in, we lose previous knowledge and experience. So the challenge for us is, how do we combine the advantages that technology can give and the fact that younger generations tend to be better at utilising it, along with the embedded knowledge of people that have actually been through the industry over X amount of years. And it's combining those into digital workflows. And that's what we're very much trying to do. So I think the challenge is how we combine those two. It shouldn't be an either or.
Yeah, I was very interested. I was at a construction industry council meeting where they were talking about reverse training, where they had the apprentices and the new guys who were in, maybe new graduates in, training their mentors and trainers, and trying to see if they could get a two-way flow going between those with the experience and those with the modern AI skills, which I thought was quite an innovative way of doing it. But open to all of you, do you find that a lot of businesses, particularly maybe at the smaller end or the consultancy size, are put off by maybe the cost of the new tech? They're worried that how much they're going to have to spend, the initial outlay, and then worried that perhaps they're going to spend all this money and it's going to be outdated in a year, 2 years, 3 years. Do you think that that is a barrier? Anyone?
I could come in on that. I think obsolescence is a real challenge. You look at something like a computer vision model that's detecting, I don't know, it could be detecting potholes, for example. And 3 or 4 years ago, a startup comes up with that model and it's really cutting edge, and they get some investment, they start to get some trials going, they develop, something that's capable. Whether people are buying it that much, I'm not sure. But in terms of the raw technology, you look at something that was unique and quite advanced 4 years ago, and probably 3 years after that, 3 or 4 years after that, it's on the Microsoft store, right? And a consultant, an AI consultant, can actually take that model from the Microsoft store and really kind of play with it for a client at a fraction of the cost. And then I guess going a level up, like the full de-democratization of AI, is you've got someone like Facebook who wants to create a computer vision model that really could detect anything, at which point the startups, the consultants really do start getting pushed out. So I think the issue around obsolescence is a big one. I don't think it's the biggest one though, because actually everyone knows that things are changing. Everyone gets that. If something works now, if you talk to anyone in an organisation, they say they're thinking about 5 years or 10 years, but they're not. They're thinking about, I have a problem now that I need a solution to. And the issue with AI products is that there's a complete lack of hard models of return on investment and impact. And that is a result of numerous things, from products that are there that just don't quite fit the bill. A lack of products that get developed outside of the operational models of their clients really struggle to start to develop the model of return for the client naturally. So if you develop a computer vision piece of software that detects potholes, you need to be able to tell your client exactly how that's going to create a return for them. Not just that it's successful at detecting potholes, you need to demonstrate how it can embed, enhance, or potentially transform their operational model, and by doing so, create a saving or a return. And the industry is very immature at doing that. Like, we have products that are available to buy or from the market, and we're very unclear. We're too unclear about the core return from them. So there's how can you expect people to buy when they don't know what the benefit they're going to get is?
Has anyone else got anything to add on that?
Yeah, I'll come in on that. I think I agree with what Seb's saying. And it's interesting to watch with regards to obsolescence. I come from a design background. MEP is my background in designed buildings, largely until I sort of moved into the digital sphere. And I think there may be some differences in different parts of the industry because a good design is a good design. Where technology helps us, it doesn't help us make better designs. It doesn't help us do higher tech things with MEP equipment. What it does is it allows us to do it quicker and possibly charge the same and make a little bit more money. So that's where, in those areas, obsolescence, I think, has less of an impact. It's just, it affects your bottom line. But ultimately, last year's tool, if it was good last year, it's still good today. So it'd be interesting to see. Obviously, my perspective is very different to Seb, so it'd be very interesting to see over time how those two different perspectives possibly experience different pressures. And another point I'd like to make would be, so the curve of change. Everyone always talks about the fast end of a logarithmic curve, the really steep bit. That's really exciting. But they forget that about 95% of that curve, almost nothing happens. And that's where we are right now. We've had this great step change in technology. But people are only at the beginning of that curve, and we're only on the really, really, really shallow upslope. And we've got quite a long way to go before it starts to go haywire. So I think we're seeing the boring stuff get done now. So lawyers are using large language models, for example, to search through contracts for the words uncapped liability. It's not a massive step forward. It's helpful, but we're not about to go to the moon on that.
Yes. Liz Bennett, who was one of our speakers this morning, points out that one of the key roles of the principal designer is that management of information and making sure that the information flows are open between all people in a project. I think she was quite interested in the garbage in, garbage out idea. How do you think that the industry, the tech side of the industry, is going to be able to respond to making sure that the information that you've got isn't just an accelerating pace of gobbledygook, and that the information that you're actually using is top class and good stuff? James, what do you think? How do you actually make sure that your information is good so that the input end is up to scratch?
Well, I suppose an example of how we might try to do that would be when we're looking at housing assets with asset managers and trying to map decarbonisation plans for massive housing assets. So we're just working with a local authority up in Scotland at the moment to decarbonise their 37,000 homes, and there's a huge data model that we've had to assemble, pulling in large data pools from different sources, and I think one of the things that struck me with that process was there's a lot of things that can go wrong, but if there was a quality control procedure in place that had so in AI terms, if a lot of that information could get pooled and prioritized, and using a couple of key archetypes to then replicate through using AI, but ultimately having experienced human oversight to make sure that the first iteration is going to be correct, and then that can be replicated that 99 or 90,000 times. Then that can give you a bit of confidence. But yeah, vetting the quality of the data that's going in is absolutely imperative. I mean, we were finding so many anomalies, and quite often these are data sets that are built by humans. And some things get replicated. Sometimes an error creeps in. That if that error then gets replicated, it starts to multiply up fantastically badly, and so you start to get these really distorted results that you then, when you then at the data review stage, you're basically looking at that thinking, oh God, where did that go wrong? We've got to go back 3, 4, 5, 6 steps now to try and unpick that. So I think having good quality management of the data, having gateways, hold points where you're looking at what's going in, is that right? Is this process really doing what we want it to do? Is it taking us down the wrong path? And then regrouping and saying, all right, well, let's edit it, let's test this, and then we can push it forward in a more constructive and positive way. But yeah, I mean, it's the same with building, really, in a way. Having good quality management, we've got to. It's not just the case of handing over a bunch of design information to a building contractor. We as design teams need to all kind of take responsibility to manage the quality along with the contracting team.
Andrew, have you got any thoughts on that as to how do you manage the quality of the initial input?
I think it's very difficult to add much to what James said. I was sitting here nodding away quite contentedly. So all I can really do is give a personal perspective on how we do that. And it's the old-fashioned manner. It's you write something down, you give it to a colleague to review. And you don't send it to the next step before such time as you've done that. And I think we need to be very careful not to get carried away. We still need to do that day in, day out.
Thank you, Patrick.
Well, just to reiterate that, I mean, it's interesting, we're doing that study at the moment on existing analysis, and we found that there seems to be a lack of gateway checks. So we're actually producing guidance at the moment, and it will say exactly that. You've got to check your input data, you have to have gateways along, and you have to check at those gateways and the end, and you have to have a parallel process so that you can actually validate and verify, and you need to actually check the processing. So it's really a sort of three-stage process. One is, is the machine doing what you think it's doing? Are you checking it each stage? And are you running something parallel? Because it's really difficult to understand it. So are you running those test cases? And I think, to be honest, industry needs guidance on that. That's what or the digital industry really could do with unified guidance on that. Because when you look at sort of some of the software programs, they say, well, what's the level of QA? Well, it's NAFEMS, it might QA. But I think as an industry, we could do with far more guidance on how you apply these techniques to sort of digital engineering.
It's starting to sound a lot like industrial manufacturing, isn't it?
That's actually one of the points that one of the audience has raised. It's Jeffrey that has raised this point about it's not just enough to make sure that you've got good inputs, perhaps even good workers, but you've got to look very much at the quality of the workmanship, and perhaps AI is not the best way to do the supervision. You need to have real human eyes on the subject matter or whatever it is that you're doing. I don't know if you think that perhaps AI can maybe be a bit more accurate eventually to that point that you were making earlier, that you get a human to do it once and then you teach the machine to do it next time's out. Have you got any thoughts about quality management of the actual build and how you supervise the build? Anyone?
I think AI is an interesting concept because it doesn't do the same thing every time, whereas machines do. I think we've got to be careful there.
Yes. And there's an issue around, Jeffrey's point was actually specifically around modular build and how you just make sure, if you've got one of these things, I think we've all seen the videos of 3D printing of buildings and all the rest of it. How do you actually insert that human fail-safe into the machine if you need it? Who would like to start with that one? Seb?
Oh, I was hoping you wouldn't go to me. Patrick, do you want to answer that? You've got your hand up.
Yeah, because this is something that I've been looking at in modular construction. I think that it's not quite AI, to be honest. It's factory construction. So when we're involved, innovation. It's innovation completely. So I was involved in this in a project, and we're involved in producing guidance at the moment. And you do have to take a completely different approach to it. And you take sort of a similar approach to manufacturing, in that you can't inspect something when it's done, what you have to do is ensure that you have a QA process to begin with. And the nice thing about it is that all of the data tend to have data on everything in modular and offsite construction. So there's also a link between the sort of the CAD files and the sort of the fabrication as well, which is very powerful. But what we found we had to do was check that process initially. So you check the process, and then you have to check things in batches. So you actually have to sort of get into the factory, and you might check sort of 1 in 1,000 things, and you check things at certain stages. And also you need to have, samples for what things look like. So it's sort of transferring what you're doing normally into a factory, but checking things at stages. You can't really follow one sort of module all the way through, and making sure that people have the data for things. But it's a change from construction supervision, where you watch someone doing something, to more like sort of retail and manufacturing supervision, where you make sure that there are procedures in place and you get samples to begin with, and you then really tear those samples apart to see how they work. Because once you set the procedure up, it should produce the same result, which is not what you get in site works.
Anyone else? Yeah, on you go. Sorry.
Yeah, I really like that analogy that Patrick put forward there, and having done a very small amount of work with modular buildings, you really do have to front load the design, and a lot of the critical decisions that on a traditional construction process sometimes get spread out, and sometimes those decisions are made whilst things are being constructed. Absolutely, in modular design, absolutely those decisions have to be made upfront and be concreted in, so that those QA procedures can happen in the factory, and so that they're not happening on site when things get really messy. But there's also once that modular unit gets to site, there's a lot of coordination that needs to happen with the design team, where it has to interface with the site itself, and the groundworks and the cladding that's going to go onto it, and things like that. So quality control is absolutely paramount with all of these things: oversight, communication, and good data and monitoring of that data. But yeah, I think modular is going to streamline a lot of construction processes. It's horses for courses ultimately, so some projects will suit it better than others, and it has a huge opportunity in terms of sustainability as well, in terms of reducing waste, making sure that processes are fine-tuned so that you're not dealing with huge amounts of material that's just being disposed of. The amount of time spent on site, the movement of materials, it's got huge opportunities for that. So yeah, we're working with another architecture practice on a project down south, where with different modular cladding contractors, to try and fine-tune how we can optimize the energy efficiency of the fabric, and having to think at a really early work stage about how these materials are actually going to get to site with all the insulation intact on them. Because what quite often happens is the insulation gets adhered in the factory and then blows off the wall panel as it's careering down the motorway at 70 miles an hour. So yeah, all of these kind of design decisions and priorities need to get weighed up together. There's a lot of iterative design that needs to happen with the whole design team around the table to make sure things are optimized.
I think one for all of you. Ian has asked us whether or not you accept that sustainability is more to do with refurbishment and retrofit rather than new build, or whether or not you think, even in a sustainable context, you can still have sustainable new build. Who would like to go with that one first? Go on then.
That's only
Sorry,
because it was
Patrick,
the
yeah.
pretty much the basis of my talk. I mean,
Yeah,
we've
good.
given a hierarchy, which is in our net zero guide, and the first one, which is sort of ironic for engineers, is build nothing. You know, do you need to do it in the first place? Now that implies a complete change in our role to consultants and looking at demand. You know, why are we doing things? But that's what they've been doing with roads the last few years. Why do we need that road? So it is a different way of thinking. Then it's sort of build less, which is pretty much refurb, build clever and efficiently, which are making the most of what we have, and then using new materials. Now, the reality is that we are shifting our focus in the institution away from new build guidance to guidance on refurb, and we should refurb where we can. That's not always the case. So where that isn't the case, we're trying to make things more efficient. So we're using the technology we have. We're just about to issue a paper on reducing concrete or cement content through GGBS. But there's also huge amounts of research going on to new materials, which will help us reach our 2050 zero carbon targets. And we need those new materials. And I think that's really where the safety industry have got sort of massive input, because we need to put in place the processes by which those materials are developed. And if you look at the current crisis that's, you know, engulfing us all, RAC was an innovative material in the 50s, which we are now suffering the consequences of. So we need to make sure that the systems are in place to actually weed those things out. And some of the issues with RAC are well known about. So they need to get reported through a safety industry as well and fed back through. So in short, it is more directed towards refurb, but there will be new materials and new technologies, but they both need an overlay of safety.
Yes. Does anyone dissent from that, Seb? Or are you in agreement?
No, I mean, I agree. I think, you know, the idea of build nothing is obviously the low carbon option, but especially when you're talking about buildings and homes, it's just not the option now. I think the point around safety is really, really key, especially with offsite manufacturing. I think safety is actually a driver and a real result of the change in operational model. Even though it's not the business case, it's often the biggest. You're going to get a bigger return on your safety investment by changing your operational model around that sort of thing. I think the issue around materials is an interesting one. I can't necessarily speak for construction, but especially roads. You know, it's been difficult to introduce new materials. Often, when a material has a benefit that, say, you know, if a road lasts 3 times as long as a normal asphalt road does, it's very difficult to create. You can create the business case and you can test it in a laboratory, but then it's going to take you 90 years to actually prove that out. And not only that, but it's more expensive up front. So actually, I think materials has been a bit of an issue across civils. We've probably got a few regulatory and cultural blockers around introducing them, but we need to, because I think there's some really interesting new stuff coming through.
Okay, and we've got time, I think, just for one substantive one and then one quick question towards the end. Tim has asked about what you think are going to be the consequences of the war and the destruction in Ukraine and the need for rebuilding there. And also, when you juxtapose that against our own demands for skilled people to be able to carry out the necessary new build work in the UK. Also, I mean, if you're looking to earlier this year and the earthquake destruction in Turkey, how do you think that innovation and new skills and new tech are going to help us actually manage to rebuild everything that we need to build, not just in this country, but more widely? Let's see, Andrew.
Fixing buildings doesn't rebuild societies. So I think we need to be a little less hasty when it comes to saying, well, we're going to go and rebuild Ukraine, or we're going to go and rebuild Turkey. When cataclysms happen, societies change completely, sometimes overnight, depending on what it was, such as an earthquake. and what the locals will want may be very different to what they had the day before it happened. So to come in and say, right, well, what did you have? Right, I could very quickly throw that up tomorrow. Let's not worry too much. But that's not the world we're in anymore. So I think we need to be much more responsive to the needs of the individuals on the ground. So, but going back to the resource thing, it almost feels a bit like that old rumor of before one of the Iraq wars, when apparently a large American engineering consultancy had already signed up to rebuild the place before we'd even gone in and flattened it. I think we need to be quite careful there as well, and not be too keen to go in and submit gigantic fees to a place that's just been utterly devastated. There is work to do. There are plenty of people across the world and across Europe who can do it. I suspect we need to wait and bide until Ukrainians come asking for help, possibly Turks are asking for help, listen to them and do what we have to help what they need.
Okay, Seb, I saw you nodding along there.
Yeah, I thought it was a really, really good point. I mean, I'm sitting here thinking about which buildings in the UK, if they got raised, would we just rebuild as they are? I think, you know, it's no secret that we've spent the end of the last decade building concrete metropolises, you know, city squares that are kind of pure concrete slabs and really easy to maintain and will last for the next 200 years, but no use to anyone. So I think it's a really good point not to rush in. Ukrainians might want a different society. It might be an opportunity to think differently, not just about how we build, but actually what we build. That's often in contention with house builders who need to cram the most rooms or flats into a block as possible. You know, you have an architect who comes up with a beautiful society of amenities and community and greenery, and then can often be replaced by something, you know, slightly more grey. But no, I thought it was a good point, and it's an opportunity for the West to actually reevaluate how it supports rebuilding, especially after you know, the last 15 years with the Middle East.
Okay, James.
Well, I think there's been some really interesting things spoken about already. I really liked the point about communities and needing to engage with them and to listen to what people need and then provide it. There's a huge opportunity with this destruction that's created a tabula rasa to start to rebuild meaningful communities and structures that are going to and cities, towns, places, homes, businesses that are going to benefit communities. And yeah, I think there's a wealth of experience that that the global north can offer these nations that are having to rebuild. But we also, it can't come in as a top down, this is how you do it. We've got to be sensitive to the people whose lives are going to be affected by this rebuilding process, and make sure that they feel part of that process.
Okay. And last but not least, Patrick.
Yeah, I think they're really good points, and you know, they're sort of one that I covered in my presentation earlier, that when you look at what's happening within sustainability, it's broadened from carbon to wider societal impacts. And you know, you look at where we're moving to with regenerative design, it is all about involving stakeholders and building society in parallel with the physical infrastructure. And I think that's something that we need to do. And a parallel sort of exercise with that is, you know, when you look at what the safety industry does, we've sort of moved from how safe is a site to actually now we're looking at, well, how safe is a supply chain? So when you look at the rebuilding in somewhere like, you know, Ukraine or Turkey, well, how does that impact everyone along the chain so that all the stakeholders are actually treated fairly? And I think that overview is probably one of the areas where we can assist, because I think, you know, the UK is at the forefront of that thinking. There's a second very important point there in relation to Turkey and rebuilding, And again, it was one of the points I was making earlier, which is the need to think about resilience in building. You know, the level of sort of threat which buildings are subject to nowadays, particularly with climate change, is changing. They're not static structures anymore. And again, there's a lot of work being done in the UK on resilience. So I think that whilst we have to, you know, rebuild, we're rebuilding sort of for communities for sort of 60, 70 years or something. And I think that thought process is maybe where we may be able to transfer and help, as well as in sort of the physical innovation.
Okay, so, and finally, as it were, as they say for today, thinking about that sustainability hierarchy, just from each of you, what would you put at the top of that list? What would your, if you were going to have to create a sustainability hierarchy, what would you put at the top? Do you want to put ecology or the green belt or biodiversity, or what is your key priority when it comes to sustainability? I'll take you in reverse. Yeah, let's see where we'll start with that. Andrew.
Oh, good God. Okay, thanks for giving me that one first. I want to say none of the above.
You've had such really thoughtful answers up to now. I thought it'd be really interesting to hear what you had to say.
I'm going to say none of the above. I'm going to say, and I would say this because I'm the Chair of Society of Digital Engineering, data. And actually, sustainability needs to be based on as good an appraisal of as much data as we can possibly get. I think it's fair to say, without being too heretical, that most of the mantras we currently trot out on a minute-by-minute basis relating to sustainability are based more on opinion than they are necessarily on a holistic understanding of all the data. And that's with the best of intent. I'm not criticising anyone. I can't do a better job myself. We need to get the data and not be, as we often are when the machine spits out an answer we find really shocking. Don't ignore it. Ask why we're shocked. I think that would be my response. I don't know if it's a good one, but it's the best I've got.
James.
Yeah, I mean, it's quite hard to sum all of that up as you know, how to prioritize sustainability. But I mean, everyone's talking about climate change at the moment, but we have a real biodiversity emergency that's happening, and it will make climate change pale into insignificance if we don't start acting on that. If I were to use a 4-letter word to prioritize things, I would say love. I think we need to love the environment that we live in. We need to love nature. We need to love working with the built environment and trying to make it a more habitable place for people and other beings, and being supportive, regenerative in the design processes and systems that we implement to create a better world.
Okay, Seb?
Yeah, I'm going to go down the track of not just saying decarbonisation. I think we all care about that, and we all know that, you know, it's near the top, if not the top, really. Very passionate about biodiversity as well. I've been involved in projects to do with that, and I couldn't agree more. Just thinking like slightly differently on sustainability. If you think about the sustainability of our sector, I think there are issues there, you know, around like civils and construction, especially with an aging workforce who carries a lot of experience and is going to retire. The gender gap within the industry means that we're not really tapping into the full workforce that we could do. I think we need to like rethink our industry. I think what people do in construction and civil engineering is inherently very interesting. If you digitalize and technologize that, it's going to really attract a younger generation. And then if you overlay the fact that they are effectively delivering their job through digital tools with the previous point, which is actually that you're designing spaces and environments that are beneficial to people and the environment, and you have a really attractive proposition. And I think we're a long way away as an industry from realizing how attractive that could be to talent, because if you then get talent, you're then going to go and deliver everything that you need to do and more, including decarbonisation.
And the final word goes to you, Patrick.
Thank you. I mean, our priority at the moment is carbon, just given the crisis, but we're moving to, looking at regenerative design principles, and actually having sort of a whole wheel of sustainability issues, biodiversity, carbon, social, the elements that were in the UN SDGs, looking at where we are on a site or within a context, where we need to be, and what that gap is. So doing that basically on sort of a balanced scorecard approach on an individual product or project basis. So, get your goals to begin with, and then where are you missing within that particular context? So I think it's more than one, to be honest, but carbon is our top one at the moment.
Okay, so I'm very grateful to our panel, to Seb, Patrick, James and Andrew for the time this afternoon. I think it's been a really enlightening afternoon and something different for us too. I now have some thank yous to say before we wrap up for the day. I'm very grateful to all of our speakers, the people who spoke this morning on the challenges facing the industry, and to our champions who spoke this afternoon on sustainability, innovation, and where we're going. But today is the kind of day that can't happen without a huge amount of work in the background. So I particularly want to pay tribute to the APS home team for all the work that they have put into today. I'm very grateful to our board of directors for their support, and to the staff who have been working away in the background. Just because you haven't seen them doesn't mean to say that they are not due thanks. I'm going to do a little bit of a roll call for the people here. I'm very grateful to Andrew Lesley, who not only has been a great support in the background, helping with some of the technical questions, but Andrew is also our lead on the Building Safety Act with Mark. So again, if you haven't booked to see the webinars, they've got another one next week and you can catch up on the remaining ones online. We have had Carol Mackay and Sheena Monroe in the background helping out with registrations and to make sure that the day-to-day has continued for other members who have not been present with us today. We have had Debbie Magson, who looks after our money. So at least you know that it is all in safe hands. And today in the office, we have had Nicola Lally, who is our operations manager, and we have had the ever wonderful Laura Hardy, who has been helping out with our guests in the back in the green room. Off-site, we have also had Tina, who has been doing all of our social media. She's only been with us a couple of weeks. She's here as a contractor, but she is responsible for all the nice graphics and things you've been seeing on our social media popping up over the last couple of weeks. But today belongs to Tommy. Tommy looks after our looks after all of our webinars and our events, and today I think has worn him to a frazzle. But we are very grateful to him and all the hard work that has gone into it. So thank you very much to the home team and especially to Tommy. But more than that, I want to thank you. Thanks to those who joined us in the morning and have stuck it through all day. And thanks to those of you who were with us either in the morning or the afternoon. I do hope you have enjoyed your day with APS, and we hope to see you soon.